Dr. King shared with me his experience at the Seder. He said to me, he said, near the beginning, a little boy stood up and asked some questions, you know. I remember my son obvious here, and he knows I always interrupt people, and so I told Dr. King, you know, I remember when I was a little boy, and I would ask what we called in Yiddish the vier kashas, the arba kushiyot, and I would ask it in Yiddish and in Hebrew, you know. Tate will de fragen de vier kashas, the erste kasha is, wat was es heint Nachman Pesach, Andrich, von alle Nachten die Jahr, alle Nachten die Jahr, Ersten, in any event, I used to do it in Yiddish and in Hebrew, in Ashkenazi Hebrew in those days. I didn't do the Sephardic yet, I was a kid. So I interrupted Dr. King, told him about the Seder, you know, and he went on and he said, you know, after the child had asked the question, why do we eat only matzah, not bread? Why do we eat bitter herbs? The congregation, the people at the Seder began to read out of a book, the Haggadah. And he said, I remember the first words after the child asked the questions when they began the narration of the story. Does anybody remember the first words in the Haggadah? I'm excluding my son and Rabbi Rose and his family. Anybody remember? Yeah. Avadim hayinu leparov. We were slaves unto Pharaoh in Egypt. And we always sing, Avadim hayinu. I can't sing. I don't have the talent that Rabbi Rose has. You know, Ata b'nei chorin, b'nei chorin. And he said, I'll never forget that. They read, we were slaves under Pharaoh in Egypt. He said, the Jewish people has not forgotten in more than 32 centuries its slave origins. And not only that, they don't, not only that they don't try to sweep it under the rug and only claim to be the descendants of kings David and Solomon and so forth and so on, but they celebrate their slave ancestors. They're not unproud of them. They're proud of them for their endurance, their courage. He said, you don't blame the victim. And I'll never forget, he said, we Negroes are not going to forget our slave ancestors. We're not going to sweep them under the rug. We're not going to claim that we're only the descendants of Frederick Douglass or Sojourner Truth or, you know, George Washington Carver. Or we're going to be proud of them for their endurance and their courage. We don't condemn the victims. I conclude, because I promised Rabbi Rose that I really would be short.
She's a great strength of mine.
With a quote that Dr. King used the last year and a half of his life. I heard him use it several times. It was after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And it was about an elderly, unlettered Negro who had voted in North Carolina, who had voted for the first time in his life. He was 75 years old in those days. That was considered really old, and here I am, 84, and another time. And a reporter, as he emerged from the voting place, grabbed him and said, what did it feel like to vote for the first time in your life? And the unlettered, elderly Negro said, I ain't what I ought to be. I ain't what I want to be. I ain't what I'm going to be. But thank God, I ain't what I was. Thank God we've made progress. The United States is a better country than it was 50 years ago. white Jim Crow segregationism and racism is less. Anti-Semitism is less. Anti-women, feminism is less. Anti-gays and lesbians and transgender, bisexual is less. Anti-people with disabilities is less. But we're still not what we ought to be. We're still not anywhere near even what we want to be. And we still have, hopefully, a way to go to what we're going to be. But thank God, we're not what we were. Thank you.
Amen.
Bravo.